Michael Ferry. Michael Ferry?
It's pronounced fairy.
Come on in. So, can you tell me a little bit about your previous experience?
Yeah, I'm the fairy bread fairy. I used to make all the fairy bread.
Oh, yes, I remember eating heaps of that stuff. So, why do you need a job here?
Because I got fired.
Yeah, the fairy bread fairy might not have as much to do anymore, at least in South Australia.
Sorry, what was the question?
Is fairy bread biting the dust?
Fairy bread has been removed from the approved canteen menu.
South Australian public schools will cull Aussie staples like fairy bread.
You see, the state's education department recently announced it had made some tweaks to the guidelines they give schools on what sort of food should be sold at canteens and handed out at after-hours care, excursions and class parties. They use a system of traffic lights to categorise different foods depending on how healthy they are.
It's a guideline to help people to understand what to provide and what's going to be most beneficial for children to be eating most of the time.
According to the system, green foods you can have whenever you want, amber foods you should be more careful with, red level 1 food should only be served up to twice a term, and then there's red level 2 foods, which they say shouldn't be served at all, which now includes fairy bread, probably because of those sugary hundreds and thousands. Some other states have a similar system, and WA's also made the news recently by adding ham and cheese toasties to the no-go list.
So ham is a processed meat, and I believe that would be the reasoning behind that. So we want to be limiting our intake of processed meat because it increases our risk of bowel cancer.
And while toasties and fairy bread got all the attention, the states also added a whole bunch of other types of food to the red list, like energy drinks and caffeinated food.
There is so much more variety now of food, and we just need to keep up to date with what we're putting on that guideline.
But while Matea says there are really good reasons for having the guidelines and keeping them updated, it's also controversial. And it's not just because of people's fondness for fairy bread, but also because some reckon it's important for kids to have choice, and that we shouldn't be labelling foods as never foods.
So some kids might have a balanced diet at home, and going to the canteen is there sometimes food where they get the lollies or they get the fairy bread. They might not give us nutrition, but they give us joy and happiness, and they give us childhood memories.
And it looks like kids in South Australia have mixed feelings.
It's more of a family-related thing to stop their children from eating those unhealthy snacks.
It's a sometimes food and it should be not eaten very often.
I mean, it's fair, but people should have more freedom to what they eat.
They might be a little disappointed that someone else controls how they eat.
In any case, none of this means your favourite foods are getting banned. The recommendations don't apply to what you bring to school in your lunchbox, and at the end of the day, they are just recommendations.
The guidelines only apply to canteens, and they are guidelines. Parents are certainly still free to include fairy bread in their kids' lunchboxes if they wish.
You hear that? Fairy bread can still go in the lunchbox.
So you're saying I'm not out of a job? Yes! I can still make fairy bread. 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 I can still make